say, if you inspire others to do better, to do more, then you are truly a leader. With this, I, Deepika, on behalf of the Human Resource Development Cell, Sri Ram College of Commerce, heartily welcome you all to this amazing and enlightening session. Today, we have Mr. Upendra Singh Rawat with us, a leader in the batch of 1998 of Indian Foreign Services and a graduate of IIT Kanpur. Before joining Government of India, he was a physics instructor. The moment he joined the Indian Foreign Services, he served the nation in various capacities. He started with the third secretary in the Embassy of India, Buenos Aires, and he also served in the Ministry of External Affairs, New Delhi. And Sir is presently serving as the Ambassador of India to the Republic of Panama, Costa Rica, and Nicaragua. Well, we welcome you all, sir.
Thank you very much. Should I start?
No, sir. Yes, sir. But before starting off with the main session, I would request all the participants to keep themselves muted throughout the session to avoid any disturbance. And if you have any question or queries, please put it in the chat box. We'll take them in the end. Right? So let's start with the session. And the theme for today's session is representing India. And I hope this session is going to be going to add a lot of value to all of us young minds. Thank you so much. So now you can start.
Thank you very much, Deepika. I am very happy to address a young audience about this topic of your HR Connect 2.0. Every profession matters, and I'm very happy that SRCC College is taking this initiative to bringing students from different parts of the country together and people like me also to share their experiences because we are living in a time of not only rapid changes in the society but rapid advancement and kind of changes that used to take place in the previous centuries over hundreds of years. Those kind of changes in today's society take place in one generation or so. So this connect is very important in the rapidly changing society. So let me start with giving a brief overview of or summary of what I have in mind to present today. Uh, Firstly, I have thought of about making a presentation of about half an hour before I take questions. So I have structured my presentation into 6 parts. Part 1, I will deal with what it means to be representing one's country. And in the part 2, I will take the role and responsibilities functioning of a diplomatic mission, role of preparation in this a very highly specialized job and also generic in nature, formulation of diplomatic policy. Then number 3, I will talk about norms and protocols. Protocol is very important in this work. What it means to be an ambassador, what we call ambassador extraordinary and plenipotentiary. What is diplomatic immunity? Take example of like declaring someone persona non grata. Then number 4, I will go into activities of ambassador of a diplomatic mission. What are the typical activities of an Indian mission? Daily routine of an ambassador. Then number 5, I will talk about what does it mean to be an Indian, the timelessness of Indian story. One has to understand first what it means to be an Indian before one can represent India. And number 6, at the end, I will talk about competencies and desired characteristics of a person who represents India. Okay. So with that overview, I'll start with my first topic, what it means to be representing one's country. So representing one's country is a task which is assigned by a sending state to one of its citizens to represent it in the host state where the person is located, and he would be there to promote interests and concerns of the sending state. So what we call ambassador in a country like where I'm based, The same term is called High Commissioner if both the sending and receiving states are part of Commonwealth. And in that case, embassy will not be called embassy, but it will be called the High Commission of India. So it's a little bit of terminology, but the functioning remains the same. And one has also that ambassador or high commissioner is just one of the persons in the bigger diplomatic establishment, and he or she just happens to be the head of that diplomatic mission. And in today's world, it's not just about bilateral diplomacy between the nations, but there is also a very important component is multilateral diplomacy, which is representing one's country in United Nations and so many different organizations within United Nations and outside it also, for example, World Trade Organization. So there are hundreds of multilateral organizations as well, so that we call multilateral diplomacy. Another concept is what we call concept of accreditation, just for giving some basic ideas so that you can understand my talk in a better manner. Uh, Depending upon the interest of a sending state, it may not have embassies in all the countries in the world. You know, there are about 200 countries represented in United Nations. For example, India doesn't have embassies in all these countries. So what we do, so if there is, it's not possible to open embassies in all the countries, then ambassador located in one country can be given additional work of being in charge of bilateral relation with some neighboring countries. So that is called accreditation, concurrent accreditation. So for example, I am located in Panama, but I am also in charge of two neighboring countries, Costa Rica and Nicaragua. So I would say that I have concurrent accreditation in Costa Rica and Nicaragua. So the job of representing India is what we call diplomatic job. So what is diplomatic job? The diplomatic job is to promote the foreign policy of one's country. Foreign policy, and then one would ask, what is foreign policy? Well, foreign policy is nothing but it is an extension of national interest and domestic policy. So those components of national interest which has impinging on relationship with other countries, that is what we pursue as part of diplomacy, pursuing the foreign policy interest of the country. And in today's highly connected world through internet, social media, electronic media, and all, it has not diminished the importance of diplomacy, but it has enhanced it in terms of one's job of representation, communication, and negotiation, which has become more important and more important. And another aspect which highlights immense importance of diplomacy is that the modern world, the technology of warfare and destructive power of force has become so immense that the major powers in the world have capacity to destroy entire life on the surface of earth several times over. And in such a situation, when the fighting is so destructive, the persuasive power of diplomacy has to be the instrument of first resort, so that mankind does not destroy itself along with all the other living beings. So I will conclude my opening remarks to talk about a little bit about Ministry of External Affairs and Civil Services Examination. So Indian Foreign Service is, of course, one of the civil services to which one can join after passing through the civil services examination conducted by Union Public Service Commission every year. So this exam consists of 3 phases. Phase 1 would be preliminary exam, and phase 2 itself consists of 2 phases, the written main exam and followed by a personal interview. And based on the merit of that, people decide what service they want, and that's how one, through this process, one can join Indian Foreign Service. Once a person joins Indian Foreign Service, he or she undergoes the initial training in our Sushma Swaraj Institute of Foreign Service, and they also a small element of foundational course of 3-4 months in usually which takes place in Lal Bahadur Shastri Academy in Mussoorie, which is basically primarily academy for IAS officers. So after completing the training, a person joins the Ministry of External Affairs. He or she may be posted in the beginning for a language course to one of the embassies or of India abroad where that language is spoken. So we have about 200 missions and posts. Mission is embassy and post is consulate. Embassies are located in the capital cities of other country, and consulate, if the interests are very high in a particular country, then in other important cities there might also be consulates. For example, so many foreign countries have consulates in Mumbai in India, whereas embassy can only be located in Delhi because Delhi is the capital of India. And so within the MEA, we have about, I would say, somewhat over a third of the manpower would be working in the headquarters in India, and the remaining will be scattered all over these 200 plus missions and posts. And in Indian Foreign Service, we pay a lot of emphasis on gender equality. We had, in fact, the very first woman officer in Indian Foreign Service, Ms. C.B. Muthamma, who joined the Foreign Service in 1949. In fact, one of the photos I have here is of Ms. Muthamma. And about 10 years ago, we had opened a new, the ministry had opened a new building in called Jawaharlal Nehru Bhavan, where a bulk of the ministry is located. The auditorium, there is one full size auditorium in the Jawaharlal Nehru Bhavan, and it has been named as C.B. Muthamma Hall in her memory. We also have, just to give another specific example, a very first 100% visually challenged officer in the foreign service. She is a lady, her name is Miss Beno Jeffine, and who joined foreign service in 2015 at the age of 25, and she did her language training in Paris. And with that introduction, I move on to roles and responsibilities in representing India. So diplomacy, of course, is as old as human history, and Kautilya's Arthashastra deals with this subject quite a lot. But when we come to the modern times, then diplomacy has evolved over last 4 centuries, primarily in Europe. And there is a international convention, Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations of 1965, 1961, which codifies the functions of a diplomatic mission. And according to Article 3 of the convention, the functions of a diplomatic mission consist, among other things, in 1, representing the sending state in the receiving state; 2, protecting in the receiving state the interest of the sending state and its nationals within the limits permitted by international law; 3, negotiating with the government of the receiving state; 4, ascertaining by all lawful means conditions and developments in the receiving state and reporting thereon to the government of the sending state; 5, promoting friendly relations between the sending state and the receiving state and developing their economic, cultural, and scientific relations. So, in terms of actual doing the work, the most important thing in international relation is that preparation is the king. The preparation part is very important, especially when one is preparing for very high level visits. It is necessary to prepare, to have details ready, where the events are going to be hosted, what are going to be talking points, what are the common agreements the two sides can come to. And just to take an example, when there is a visit of a prime minister or president, the whole Indian embassy concerned may be preparing for it for several months. And I will take just one small example, anecdote about, I was posted in High Commission of India in London between 2008 and 2011. And one of the occasions, I was part of the a small group of officers who had gone from High Commission of India to a summer garden party hosted by Queen Elizabeth II in 2009. And there are protocols also, like in this case the protocol is that any protocol officer, government official, cannot touch the queen, cannot touch her handbag, which is always with her. And when you are there, you are not supposed to speak to her unless she speaks to you first. So these are all kinds of small detail and big details. Everything is important in diplomacy. The responsibility of an ambassador to represent India and his diplomatic mission would be, primarily, first one has to formulate the diplomatic policy, and considering the history of two countries, present stage, and what are the goals. And this policy would be a product of political judgment, sense, and political wisdom, and which will be based on the intimate knowledge and understanding of the both the countries concerned. And in this process of policy formulation, there will be a lot of communication, interaction with the host state, the sending state, and it will evolve with time, and there will be constant input from many different directions. So in that sense, the functioning of a diplomatic mission is very different from post office, because you have to actually apply your mind and work on deciding the policy. But having said that, while the entire diplomatic mission will prepare, but ambassador alone would be responsible for relation between the two countries as head of the organization. So, and ambassador also needs to take interest in multifarious activities of the mission, and he cannot just limit himself to one or two areas, like, "Oh, I will only do political work and I will only deal with media." No, he will have to take interest in all the areas and talk about welfare of the and also ensure the welfare of the embassy personnel. And in the countries where we have sizable Indian diaspora, that also becomes one of the very important aspects of the embassy's work, and maintaining good relation with them, and working for their welfare. So number three is, I'll talk about norms and protocols. So I just gave you an example of a protocol, even if before starting this topic about the queen. So ambassadors represent their countries abroad, and this is kind of a very unique job. And what we call ambassador extraordinary and plenipotentiary, it's a long term, but it essentially means just that they have full powers to act on behalf of that state, the sending state, in the receiving state. And protocol is extremely important in this kind of work. It's a set of guidelines and social behavior, a framework for how to interact and communicate. And in the government, protocol initiates the wheels of diplomacy, and it is what lays the roadmap for every exchange, big or small. And there is this Dr. P.M. Forney, who was a celebrated professor of civility in John Hopkins University. He talked about protocol. I quote, "Part of protocol has always been the acknowledgement of the hierarchical standing of all present. Protocol rules are based on the principles of civility," unquote. So in government, protocol is the framework within which diplomacy takes place, and the structure that houses the dignitaries as they are the as they have crucial conversations and negotiations that affect the people they represent. Just take an example. Being a good diplomat or a good host is an important part of it. And starting from handshake, which needs to be just of right duration and warmth, that if you are hosting a banquet or formal dinner, then guests should be seated according to precedence on that. You should have a proper color tablecloth, flower arrangement, everything, so that it helps in creating right ambience for better relationship. So I just take example of good protocol work when several years ago a French president visited India for the second time. He requested the Indian side to post have a particular Sikh gentleman work as his protocol officer for his visit to Agra to see Taj Mahal, because he was so much impressed by good work of that protocol officer in his previous visit to India. One of the important aspect of it is of functioning of diplomatic mission is what is called diplomatic immunity. So 1961 Vienna Convention on Diplomatic Relations not only defines the what are the roles, jobs, and responsibilities of diplomatic for the diplomatic functioning, but it also gives diplomatic immunity, uh, basically to enable diplomats to perform their functions without fear of coercion or harassment by the host country. Because in the work, sometimes ambassador or his or her team, diplomatic team, may have to do things which may not be liked by the powers to be in the host state where they are located. So the convention gives that a diplomatic immunity by international law. And in such a situation where the host government cannot take any direct action against or cannot, for example, arrest a diplomat, and if suppose they are not really not happy about a diplomat or the country of that diplomat about something, what happens, for example, is to what is in diplomatic parlance is called declaring someone persona non grata, which essentially means that the 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 country where one is serving, it declares that that particular diplomat we do not accept, and he or she will have to go back. Just take example of this week. Just yesterday, Venezuela expelled European Union's ambassador in response to the sanctions the EU bloc imposed against Venezuelan officials earlier this week. And the government of Venezuela gave 72 hours to her to leave Venezuela. Now, let me talk about some activities that a diplomatic mission needs to do to fulfill its roles and responsibilities. So activities will look to things like, as I said, formulating diplomatic priorities and policies, communicating between the two governments on important matters and common interests, then reporting, like for Indian embassies, it will be reporting to Government of India about the events of political and economic significance or any other important matter. And another very important aspect is to keep tab on the developments in the countries of accreditation and being aware of the people of influence and source of national power in these countries. One has to also cultivate friends to fulfill diplomatic responsibilities, and promoting India in the countries of accreditation, including through the media and social media, is also another important matter, which is becoming more important in today's highly connected world. And as I said earlier, maintaining good relation with the Indian diaspora. So, with this kind of work, how does a routine daily life of an ambassador or high commissioner look like? So, it will be something like that. One gets up in the morning, even before going to the embassy, one would have to keep abreast of the events of, especially of his country of posting, India, and of course world in general, so that she or he is not face a situation in after reaching the embassy where something important has happened and you have absolutely no clue about the those events which may have direct or indirect impact on your work. So after going to the embassy, ambassador maybe start the work with normal correspondence from the in the from it may be from the, like in our case from India or from the host country where we are located, and routine communications of various kind and important matters that are being considered and discussed between the two countries, or events and activities of the embassy including. Then there would be an important part of the work would be internal discussions and meetings with the officers, staff, and people working in the embassy. And in the embassy, the people who are working will consist of two parts, always in all the embassies. One would be the diplomatic component, the component which are coming from the sending country, like in my case, it will be Indians working here. And then there will be another component which is non-diplomatic, because they will be local people hired from local country in the embassy, because they understand the local language much better and they know the local. So they without a local component, embassy will find it difficult to do its work smoothly. And then there would be usually there will be some government business or cultural issues. Some delegation might be visiting from the sending state, and ambassador may have meeting with them during the day. He may also have to report on bilateral issues, prepare some internal reports on internal and external developments in the country. Various meetings, one may have. And one of the important element is participation in events in which the embassy gets invitations in events to connect with the local government, and also to with the public in general. So participation in events is very important by other diplomatic missions in the country. And lastly, the firefighting is also a part of the important part of the work. Firefighting is about something on which you have absolutely no advanced knowledge, and suddenly something important and unexpected happens. Or something bad may happen. For example, some Indians in trouble in which will create a consular issue which needs to be resolved. This life as a whole goes like any other person. When I was posted in Mexico for 3 years at the beginning of last decade with my family, and on the fourth floor of about a 8-story building, and there was a burglary in our home, and my wife and kids were not at home, and after finishing my work in the embassy, I went back to my home and my apartment, and when I uh, went to the apartment, I found that the front door is already open, and open from the opposite side, because they had broken a few minutes early, and they had to run away before they could do full burglary. But I lost not too many things, and the once we reported to the Mexican government to soothe us little bit at the entrance of our building, we are security guard. Normally, private security guard sits. They posted a police security, one person for about a week. So all this happens as a normal part of life. And the fifth topic I had is, what does it mean to be an Indian? Well, yeah, that is, I think, also one of the questions or something similar to this, which I have received. I think that question I will, is a part of my presentation. It will get covered here. So what are our most important national qualities, and how can we leverage our national qualities to bolster relationship with other countries? Now, answer to this question should come to every diplomat naturally, and it is an answer which cannot remain fixed with time. As your experience and knowledge increase, your wisdom improves, your answers should become better and better with time. So I will divide it into two parts. Number one, timelessness of Indian story, and number two, today's India. So let's first talk about timelessness of Indian story. India is an ancient and continuous civilization almost over 5 millennia, and India and China are perhaps only two countries in the world which have this continuation of civilization over millennia. Number two, I would say, centuries-old history of being multicultural, multilingual, and multi-ethnic society. We have this Indian philosophy of Shruti, Smriti, Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam. And then in medieval India, we have Bhakti, Sufi movements, so all creating our syncretic culture. Number three, India is fountainhead of many religions: Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism, and also there is peaceful coexistence with many other religions which originated elsewhere. For example, Islam, Christianity, Zoroastrianism, what we call Parsis in India. Number four, it is a land of wealth in terms of culture, family values, distinct Indian philosophy, and which includes elements like spirituality, meditation, yoga, Ayurveda, naturopathy. And one of the important component, I would say, as a subset of what I said earlier, but Indian values amply demonstrated through Smriti culture, what is also called Itihasa in that in our traditional terminology, which is ancient Indian epics of Ramayana and Mahabharata, and some others. Number two, today's India. Today's India, I would say what it means to be an Indian. The number one which we use, we always say, is vibrant democracy with rule of law and citizen rights. And next, economic development with equal emphasis on sustainability, adherence to international laws and norms. And India, we also see India as responsible global power. And another aspect is our Indian culture of sharing the fruits of our success with friends in neighborhood and beyond. And I will take example of COVID-related medical donations and now donation of vaccine that India is doing right now after taking care of the needs of its own population. Then it's a young country, so youth is the future. That is another key concept for us. And as I said earlier, we have big active influential diaspora globally. And I will take just in 2 lines example of Panama. It's a very small country relatively with a population of 4.5 million, 45 lakhs. But in this 45 lakhs, we have 15,000 people of Indian origin living here. And it is the maximum population of Indians living in Latin America, if you exclude United States, Canada, and Caribbean countries. So except these three, rest of Latin America, this is the highest number. And I think it's perhaps because of during the creation of Panama Canal more than a century ago, many people started coming from that region. I'll just take a small example. Last anecdote that I have about, like as an ambassador, I hosted I came to Panama in November 2019 and in March 2020, just before, a few days before pandemic related lockdown started. We hosted a big Holy Milan party, we called it, at night, dinner party for Panamanians and Indian community here, and 100 200 participant came. We had to create a lot of ambience. I have a photo here of that Holy Milan party. If this photo can be put here, in which we created ambience by, you can't play color. Yeah, this is the photo. You can't play colors like we do in India, but holy color, just to put a tilak tika. And then there is also a TV screen here. In the TV screen, I played the Holi related songs from Indian movies, and this kind of, there is a lot of hard work that goes for such a dinner for weeks, but in the end it's highly worthwhile because you get connected with all the, or you involve with the community, with the local community, whether it is the local population or Indians, and you build the relationships, and which later on becomes as a component in your embassy's part of work, and it facilitates in future building on linkages between the two countries, and improving relations and helping in the work. And I will conclude, as I said earlier, but to talk about competencies and desired characteristics of a for representing India. So I will again divide it into two parts. One is what is immediately and directly relevant for the job. So job of a diplomat is very different from any other job, because in civil services, because a diplomat has to work in a foreign environment, in a foreign country, and where everything is very different. Another aspect is the language skills are very important. Apart from knowing the Indian official Indian language and in local Indian languages, English is language of international business. So one has to know English, and also the local language has to be one should also know local language, if not fully, but at least some knowledge of local language. Then one has to have good knowledge of policies, priorities, functioning, etc. of the, like in our case, government of India and our own ministry, so that we can follow those interests here. And then he has to be very, he or she has to be very open to and very enthusiastic to receive information from all kind of sources. So needs to be very active to get information, to be to understand what is happening around. And then one needs to synchronize the priorities of the two countries. So you see that how interest of two countries can be synchronized, so that there is a forward movement. And ambassador has to function as a team and give credit to where it is due, rather than hogging the limelight herself. And one has to also remember that one has to work in background, because even as an ambassador, one remains a civil servant. So political leaders have that kind of work where they can take credit, and that they represent the public face of democracy. But civil servants, including ambassadors, have to work in the background, not hogging the limelight. And finally, the most important part is that he or she should never let his or her country down in any situation, because this is not personal. If you are representing India, then you are representing India. You are working for Indian interest, not for your personal interest. So you cannot let your country down. And general skills, general which are also required to do such a job in a good manner, is that you have to have very good knowledge about India, generic sense, whether it is Indian history, Indian culture, Indian civilization, current developments, economic situation, Indian states, culture. And then, as I said earlier, which is because two lists are linked, not letting down your country in any situation implies that you have to have very good control over your emotions. Then one has to use strengths, Indian strengths, without being very vocal about it, because it sounds egoistic if you are very vocal about whether your interest or your country's interest. And then one has to follow the take a lot of interest in the matters and development in your countries of accreditation. One in today's world, one has to have very good social media skills as well. And the last, with which I will conclude my presentation, it had overshot a few minutes over half an hour I designed, but like this is last and most important, which in my opinion is follow good ethical behavior, like adhering to the best moral practices of India's composite age-old culture, humility, approachability, and kindness to help in better execution of our responsibility and to enhance image of India. Because if one's behavior is falling below the highest moral standards as an ambassador, as a diplomat, then in the host country where you are present, people may start taking implication that India and Indians in general are such kind of bad people. So following high ethical standards is, I feel, is the most important. Thank you. So I am through with my presentation.
Thank you so much, sir. Well, that was a very knowledgeable and insightful session. And thank you for sharing our knowledge with us. Now, I would request all the participants to put their questions in the chat box or just unmute themselves and ask the questions. If we could allow us them to do so. Hello? Am I audible?
Yes,
Yes,
Deepali.
Deepika.
Okay, now we can go ahead with the question answer round. So I have a question in the chat box by Sambhav. He asked that, do you think that minimum age to attempt UPSC exams should be shifted to 23 years so that students first get a chance to settle their life?
No, this may not necessarily be the case because different people have different priorities, and the UPSC gives, I think, sufficient leverage for the upper age limit for writing the exam. So I think that it sounds all right because if someone wants to do little later, he has that facilities, and someone who wants to start immediately, for example, after graduation, then one can start early. So I think this gives flexibility to everyone at whichever time one wants to try.
All right, sir. Thank you, sir, for answering. And apart from this, we also have a question that, do you want to give any tips for the civil service aspirants?
Okay, yeah, no, I would say a few generic things because things have changed quite drastically since the time I wrote civil services exam in 1997. I had got a rank of 39 in that year. In those days, we had as a part of prelim not only general studies but also one optional subject as prelim. There was no negative marking, if I remember, in prelim. And in the main exam, we used to have two optional subjects apart from general studies, Hindi, English. So nowadays, the emphasis on optional subjects is down, but the other aspects are similar. We were also told that when we were doing that, to understand the basics, go through the NCERT books and to understand the basics, and then you can follow up with some advanced things using other material. So my personal view is that coaching is not the most important thing. One can go or not go for coaching depending upon one's circumstances. The most important thing is to have to prepare well with discipline and with focus. And so perseverance, discipline, focus is the most important thing. If that requires working in isolation for some people, that is good. For some other people, preparation in the group activity is better. So keeping all in mind, I think if one devotes about 1 year or little more of a time for a focused study for the exam, that should be sufficient. And the discipline, prioritization, perseverance is most important because one needs to know good, but should not. In many people in the process of trying to get an edge, they start going too much into details in certain aspect. The thing is that the syllabus is so vast. General studies and these kind of topics are endless. If you try to become a PhD scholar or a master in something, then it may also become counterproductive because you can't become master in everything. And if you go into too much into deep, then there will, in one area you can become even better, but in many other areas you will not get time even to do a normal preparation. So that's what I mean by balance. So then I bring it down to 3-4 keywords: perseverance, discipline, and balance among all the different elements that are there.
So
Yeah.
we have another question. Is there any specific degree to be taken for IFS or selections or any other procedure for it? And what about Indian Forest Services?
No, the Indian Foreign Service is just in many countries there is some specialized knowledge before international relation and or required for that. But in India, civil services are very generic. So whoever is eligible to write Indian Civil Services examination is eligible to become part of Indian Foreign Service. It is all basically merit based. You get rank in Civil Services exam, and depending upon your choice, you take whichever service you want. So that is about Indian Foreign Service. So no, there is no specialized knowledge required beforehand. If you are eligible for civil services examination, that's fine. Indian Forest Service is completely different. It's a technical job, and UPSC conducts exam for that as well. But there is a separate exam for Indian Forest Service with a separate requirement, which will have some technical input as well, because that is the reason that exam is separate, because that is considered a technical specialized job for which entry requirement will be different, whereas civil services exam is general generic in nature, which will have those age kind of criteria, but primarily anyone who has done graduation degree from anywhere, that's the primary eligibility. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you so much, sir. We have another question which says that, like, whenever we are representing our country, there comes a responsibility that whatever you do is you represent your country. So how do we deal with that?
You mean responsibility of representing one's country?
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah, so that is what I was saying. Now, this question I have covered, I think, in immense depth in my presentation, because there are different aspects about answering this question. One is the personal conduct of the person. As I said, that your conduct should be of very high ethical standards. So that is a primary basic from the personal time. From the it's in terms of doing ability to do one's job very well, one has to have very good knowledge about India. And when I say knowledge, I had meant both knowledge of what is happening in India today, our economy, culture, society, and developments in the country, but also that what I said, the timelessness of Indian story, representing an old continuous civilization, historical values, and syncretic culture which developed over thousands of years with the external influence and internal changes. So all those are an elements which go into making a person a better ambassador for his country, and the one should remain, of course, focused in today's world. While the timelessness is, of the story is fine, but the results you want are in today's world. The results are not in yesterday's world. Yeah. So I can't answer this question in 1 minute. That's why I had half an hour initial presentation, which answered exactly the same question. Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir. We have another question which says that you have also spent quite a few years of your life in IIT. So how has that shaped your personality?
Yeah, when I look back in those days of my life in IIT, I think those were the extremely formative time of my life, and very good and positive impact on me. So like one thing which I remember very well is that when you go to the IIT first, most of us who reach there, we are usually the toppers in our school. So topper or first or second, whatever in one's school reaches IIT, and then you what we say in Hindi के पता लगता है कि अब ऊंट आया पहाड़ के नीचे. So that is the first realization you get, that from the topper you are now either average or below average or whatever. So that's the first realization, and I found myself immediately that from a topper in my school I am now average. So, but I internalized that within a few days, and it was fine. Work study is very hard in IIT. In those days, we had to 2 semesters in a year, and semester system in one semester with holidays and all. One semester lasted little over 4 months, and in little over 4 months, we had two midterm exams, one final exam, and grading was not just on that. Grading also dependent on what answer you gave for assignments. And then there were surprise quizzes in tutorials. You don't know that there will be a quiz, but suddenly they will have a quiz, and that will also have, if there are 2-3 quiz in a course, then 10% of the course final grading will be on those 3 quizzes. So all those kind of things, very hard academic environment. And one of the things which made life even more difficult was grading was relative in those days in IIT Kanpur. I don't know what it is today, but relative grading means it's not absolute that 80% above A grade, 70% above B. No, it's relative. At average, you get C grade. 1 standard deviation above average, you get B, and 2 standard deviation above A, 1 below D. And if you are more than 1 standard deviation below average, then you fail and you repeat the course. But having said that about the studies, the most important memory I went for 3-4 years ago, I went for what is called Silver Jubilee reunion of my batch, which means 25 years after you complete your degree, you have this reunion. So that also has gone now, it's more than 25 years. So you remember study, but you also remember those other things, extracurricular activities. I was involved a little bit in sports. I remember them more. We are in first year, we also had this National Cadet Corps kind of activity. In those days, we used to see very painfully. We have to do 6 courses and so many contact hour studies. And now in the morning, they are also making run for National Cadet Corps and doing that stupid march past 1-2-1, 1-2-1. But today I have better memory of that than in my classroom. So perspectives change with time. So that's the biggest lesson I think I can give, is that your own perspective about life changes. If certain thing, when it is happening, you feel very bad where you are made to get up 5:30 in the morning, at 6 o'clock you are on the ground doing 1-2-1-2, and you feel very bad about it at that time. And look at me quarter century later, I feel, oh, that was a wonderful experience of life, and I look at it more fondly than many of my other experiences in IIT. So that's how life evolves.
Thank you so much, sir. That was very well answered. Now, we would like to wrap up this session. And before that, I would like to extend a vote of thanks on behalf of the Human Resource Development Cell. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us today and sharing your experiences and your journey with us. It was really an insightful session, and we learned a lot from this session. Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, and all the best to all of you in all your future endeavors. Thank you. Bye-bye.
I would also like to extend a vote of thanks to our audiences for being so patient and so enthusiastic. Thank you so much. Now we formally conclude the session.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Bye.